Hey everyone! Alright, so most of you know that I am in Vietnam right now when you are watching this, so I decided that instead of waiting and doing my presentation later or trying to go earlier, that I would record it so that you guys could have a great time watching it and laughing at any little mistake that I make. So, you know, it's fun. So today we are going to talk about Chapter 7 in our Kouses and Posner book, and this chapter is entitled Experiment and Take Risks. So, what I would like everybody to do first, if Dr. Brown doesn't mind pausing the video for a second just so we could think about this, I want you all to think of a time when you took a risk. It could be a positive outcome, it could be a negative outcome, but think about a time where you experimented and you took a risk on something. I want you to talk with each other, and I want you to figure out what worked, what didn't work, and how you could have changed it. This is going to be really, really short. I only want you to really take 5 minutes for it because we're going to talk about it, and I'm sure that you guys could have a lot more in-depth conversation after the video is over. So if Dr. Brown would like to, he could pause the video now for you, and everything will be good. So, Kouses and Posner present this chapter in a way that shows how taking risks can make a positive change. The two most essential elements to being a successful leader, according to them, is to generate small wins and to learn from experience. Now, those things kind of sound like they're pretty self-explanatory, but I'll be honest with you, going through this and when I was reading about it and trying to figure out how to present this to you guys, there's a little bit more to it, and a lot of it you could say that is common sense, but without understanding it and realizing it, there's no way for you to apply it. So the way that they did this and the way that they presented it was really easy for the reader to understand, and it worked really well. So if you guys haven't read the chapter, I really, really think that you should. So throughout the presentation, we're going to talk about each of these two, generating the small wins and learning from the experience, and the aspects that fall underneath of each of those. Okay, so generate small wins. I know from even my own personal experience that a lot of the times I get focused on, you know, the big picture with everything. You know, I want a house, I want a dog, I want, you know, this, I want that, and that's the big picture. And instead of taking these small wins where I have my own apartment, I have cats, I might not have a dog, instead of taking those small wins, you know, I'm still focused on that bigger picture. So one of the best ways to keep your employees thinking positively is to boost up those small wins. You know, many times my husband's had to try and tell me, hey, look at all the positive things that have happened, you know, this, and then there's that, and it makes it a lot easier when somebody else is helping you point out those positive things. But if you are just sitting there and you're just kind of telling people, well, big idea, they're not really going to want to do anything else. So the big thing that you have to remember is that small steps get you towards a goal. Even if that goal is not the big picture, even if it is only slightly related to the big picture, it is still a goal that you're hitting. And you can take pride in that, and when you do that, you can help your employees become much more involved and motivated. So, I mean, if you would like, we can pause the video here and you can answer this question, or at least think about it throughout the rest of the slides. How do we make large changes? And that can be different for everybody. So I just want you guys to be thinking about that a little bit. When trying to make a large change, you have to take small steps. Like I said before, you know, small victories are the way to go. You know, hence the little guy over here, small victory. You know, it doesn't have to be something huge. It doesn't have to be, you know, this super big goal or anything that you've accomplished. But when you take something little and you make it bigger, it helps people to see that you are proud, no matter what, even if that large goal hasn't been hit yet. And it will make hitting that large goal even better. So I just want you guys to think about, you know, when you walk into a new job, or let's say, you know, you have, you know, a new boss, and that person comes in and tries to absolutely 100% change everything. I mean, you're not exactly happy about that, and I'm very, very sure that you would fight them on that. So you need to think about that whenever you're leading and whenever you're the one who's actually doing this, because if you don't, then you're going to be that person that, you know, you just thought in the back of your head, well, I would hate that person. I wouldn't want that person to be leading me. So you have to think about that. You know, breaking down the big picture will help employees also gain trust in your ability to lead. So when you do have small wins, you know, even if they're towards the goal or even if they're not towards the goal, you're going to build your credibility no matter what. And that is important whenever it comes to being a leader. So Kouses and Posner break it down into these 3 elements, which I'll talk about next. And this is, you know, before you can make a change with anything, you have to build psychological hardiness, break it down, and profit from small wins. So, building psychological hardiness. Okay, so jumping into a place where you think you know it all because you've been doing it for 10 years and you just start to make changes is not the way that you make changes within any organization, no matter how similar they might be. You need to know what you're doing and have an attitude to match that, but later on we'll talk about this more. You also have to be able to own up to your mistakes too. But having an attitude to match, you know, your I guess your stronger abilities will allow you to show people that you are confident in what you're doing and that you know what you're talking about. But in the same respect, you can't just jump in there and do it. You can't just jump in there and do it without knowing anything about the organization. So psychological hardiness, this is something interesting that I, looked at whenever I was reading. Psychological hardiness is considered to be something that people with highly stressful tasks have that help them to accomplish the task at hand without losing control and keeping a positive attitude. I found this to be, actually really interesting because I do consider myself to be one of those highly stressed people who, even when I'm faced with something that, might seem like it's impossible, I function a lot better when I am stressed. I might have that moment of self-doubt, but I don't let people see it. I make sure that I am confident in everything that I do. And, that is what psychological hardiness is making sure that, even if you might not know it all, you fake it till you make it. That's one of the big things here. Break it down is the next aspect of it. So, sorry the picture didn't fit all the way on here, but you can see, you break it down and you have smaller increments and, eventually it leads to success. So, even if you have a really, really great, huge, big idea, that doesn't matter at all. People will still push against you. If they don't like the idea, if they don't think it could work, it all depends on the experiences they've had. They will push against you. So instead of coming up with one or two really big ideas that are going to massively change everything and make everything better, it is much simpler and much more effective to break it down into smaller increments and to make sure that you get people on board. By doing so, you will gain credibility and you will get people on your side. Something important to remember is, if small ideas fail, you try until you get it right. Think about it. If you have two huge ideas and both of those ideas fail because you didn't take it in smaller steps, what do you think is going to happen to your credibility? So it's important that when you have small ideas, even if you fail, you understand and you realize that you can learn from those experiences. So, like I said, it is important to experiment and take risks, but you have to do it in smaller steps because if you don't, then the big ideas will fail, and if they fail, you lose your credibility and then nobody wants to work for you. All right, so I think this is the last one in here, and it is profit from small wins. And I took a quote directly from the book here because I really, really liked what it had to say. Small wins produce big results for a very simple reason. It's hard to argue with success. Think about it. If something works, you're not going to change it, right? So if somebody has a small win, it was successful. You can't say that it wasn't because it obviously was. So people do tend to feel a sense of accomplishment when they hit a long-term goal or a major breakthrough. But they're rare. And that's one thing that you have to remember is that these big breakthroughs or major developments, whenever it comes to these ideas, they're rare. They are not going to happen all the time. So making smaller goals will keep things consistent. And hitting those small goals can keep people happy, it'll boost morale, and it'll even keep them motivated. So that's a really important thing to think about. How do we learn? We learn from experience. Okay, so this is one of those things, and I know that it's rather simple, but I always go back to it. Mommy and Daddy tell you not to touch the stove. What do? You touch the stove. You learned from that experience. You know, not every single experience that you have is going to be like that, or is going to be as simple as that, or is going to be even somebody telling you not to do something and then you do it anyways. Who knows? It might not have been hot. But you have to realize that you need to learn from the experiences that you do have. You know, if a child burned his hand every single time that he walked up to the stove but still kept touching it, obviously that child's not learning anything from that experience. And it can go the same way for somebody who's trying to push for a big idea that, you know, they see this vision but it's just not working. So, I mean, you have to learn through those experiences. And it's really, really important to understand that nobody ever gets it right the first time. People fail constantly. I mean, you think of some of the biggest names out there, and it doesn't matter whether they were successful the first time or they failed, you know, however many times. Nobody ever gets it right the first time. You always need to make sure that you're thinking about what can be learned from the experience. Whether you fail, whether you're successful, whether you had to make changes in order to make it successful, you need to take away from that situation what you were able to learn from it. Being an active learner. This is something that I think we all can understand. Just because you're the leader doesn't mean that there aren't things that you have to learn. I mean, you think about this and, you know, let's say that you're changing jobs and you're starting out and you used to work off campus with students who, you know, had housing or whatever. And then now you're going to move to on campus, you know, housing and residential life. You don't know everything. You do not know everything that goes on because the job that you had before and the job that you have now are two completely different things. They might function somewhat of the same way, they might have some of the same rules and stipulations, but it is a completely different environment for the most part. So when you're engaged in learning, you will throw yourself into experimenting and learn to love the thrill and taste of success. When you learn something new, I mean, I don't know if this is the same for everybody, but when you learn something new, at least for me, I get excited about it because I think about, you know, oh, well, how can I use this? I learned this, so now how can I apply it to that? It's one of those things where, you know, you have to be active and you have to be able and willing to learn. And now if Dr. Brown wants to go ahead and pause the video, like I said, you can, you can't, you don't have to, whatever. You can all talk about a time when failure was more important than success in your profession. Part of being an active learner, I mean, at least for me, I believe, you know, is learning from your mistakes and figuring out when failure was something that that actually helped you more than succeeding did, or, you know, the failure led you to success. So, you know, I'd really like you guys to think about this, whether, you know, you pause the video now or you talk about it later. So, one of the big things that a leader must do is create a climate for learning. I want you to think about what it would look like for you to create a climate for learning. I just want you to take, you know, a quick minute, think about, you know, what your ideal climate for learning would be. Would it be in a classroom? You know, how would the person handle situations? That sort of thing. Just think about it for 10 seconds. So, Kouses and Posner, and I definitely think that this is like 100% accurate, they suggest that the best environment for success is one that has openness, patience, encouragement, and supportiveness. These are so important when it comes to creating an environment for people that they feel safe, they feel supportive, they are supported, they feel like, you know, the person has patience, or the whole, you know, group of people have patience. I mean, this is key. Without these elements, people are less likely to feel as though there is room for growth and there is room for learning. How you handle a situation as a leader can definitely impact your organization. You have to think about it. If somebody makes a mistake, and, you know, let's say that it was a medium mistake. It doesn't have to be small, it doesn't have to be just a little bit of a medium mistake, a paper mishap that can't easily be fixed, but, you know, it can be fixed still. If you turn around and you start screaming and yelling at that employee, telling them how terrible of a job that they did, do you think that that is a correct way to create a climate for learning. What is that employee learning by you screaming at them? Nothing. So it's important that, in a situation like that, you make sure that, if there is a reason that you need to pull the employee aside and tell them that they did something wrong and you need to discipline in any sort of way, publicly humiliating them is not the way to do it. You have to make sure that you control yourself and you do things in the correct way. And one of the biggest, I would probably argue the most important thing, is when you make a mistake, you better own up to it. We talked about this in class before about, people who make mistakes and they try to cover them up. I mean, we talked about the Penn State scandal, they tried to cover it up instead of actually doing something about it. You saw how that works. Well, if you make a mistake, then you have to let people know. And by doing so, you think about it, you want somebody who's honest. That's number one. And, if you want somebody who's honest, then if they make a mistake, you want them to tell you the truth. You want them to own up to it and take responsibility for it. And if they do that, then they're more likely to have you're more likely to have their credibility. I mean, I know personally, I want somebody who's honest and takes responsibility for their actions and for their mistakes. It also makes me feel like they're human too. So, what does this mean for us? What does experiment and take risks mean? Being a leader does not mean that we have to assert our power once we have it. That's one of the big ideas, I think, even though it might not have been completely said in this chapter. It's kind of one of those underlying themes. You don't just walk into an organization and start changing things. You need to make sure that you take small strides and to learn from the mistakes that you make, whether they're just your mistakes or they're, the organization's mistakes as a whole. I'm sure all of us could come up with ways that, risks and experimenting have helped us and hurt us. So, I want to end on this where you guys have an open discussion, and I'm sorry that I'm not there to, facilitate this and to talk about it a little bit more, but I think it's important for you guys all to talk about, how taking risks will help you, have helped you in your current work, and how it could help you in the future. I want you to think about, what you want to do with the rest of your life, where you're going to work and what your ideal job looks like. And, think about how experimenting with things will make it easier or how it could make it harder. Look at the benefits, look at the negatives. Think about it. And, just remember that without mistakes, everyone would be perfect and every plan would be perfect. Thanks.